Welcome, book lovers. I'm Rachel Barenbaum, and you're listening to Check This Out, a series where we talk with emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. A series brought to you by New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire. I am thrilled to be able to share these conversations with you. Today, we are delving into a fantasy, traveling on a grand express train from Beijing to Moscow by taking the shortest route possible. A route that runs through the magical Wastelands in Sarah Brooks' debut novel, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. You basically sign your life away to get on board this train, and the journey could drive you mad. But if you survive, it will be the thrill of a lifetime, the subject of stories for decades to come. The novel and the train ride it describes are fantasy at its best, true magic. Sarah Brooks, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to talk to you about your magical debut, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands.
Hi, Rachel. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us, Sarah. I have so many questions about this novel. It really is an adventure. It's fun, it's dark, and while it's about a train ride, and I was all in on this train ride, there's really a lot more going on. And when I sat down to try to write up a description of this book, I wasn't sure where to start. And so I really wanted to ask you, how do you describe this book?
My pitch is that it's an alternative history. So it's set at the end of an alternative 19th century, where the only supposedly safe way across the dangerous lands of the Wastelands is by armoured train. And the novel follows three characters who all have their reasons for being on the train and for sort of daring to take this journey despite the dangers. And we follow them as we realize that the promises that the train company, the Trans-Siberian company, makes, that the train is completely safe, you will definitely get to your destination absolutely fine, are perhaps not absolutely true.
I think that's a great description. One of the things that I loved is really that it is near history. So there are parts that are very close to what could be real, but it's also very clearly fantasy and invented. And you really go back and forth on that line of real, not real, very carefully.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a huge fantasy reader. I absolutely love fantasy, but I also love historical fiction. And this is set right at the end of the 19th century. So we're just on that cusp of change. So that I think in the real world was a really fantastical, exciting time when people didn't know what was coming next. And there was this feeling of a world that was changing. So I felt that setting was perfect for a novel. But then, of course, rather than writing straight historical fiction, writing historical fantasy just gives you that opportunity to really push things further and to take ideas that you might sort of see from real history and kind of ask those questions, what if, and really play around with it.
And I love that you're really capturing that moment in time because it's before the First World War. We're on the cusp of all of these scientific discoveries, innovations, and philosophy and art, the Impressionists. There's really this faith in human ability in that moment in history. And I think you capture that in this armored train idea.
Oh, I hope so. One of the things I really wanted to do in the novel was to sort of explore these ideas about the human ambition to sort of take over and to take control and to stake their claim to places, to people, to scientific ideas or to religious ideas. And I think what I wanted to do with the train and the Wastelands was to show that actually it's not always that easy, and the kind of the confidence of perhaps the 19th century man especially is shaken maybe in the course of this story.
Would you read for us so we can hear your voice?
So I'm just going to read a page from the chapter where we first meet Jiang Weiwei, who is one of the key characters on the train, a child born on the train. So this chapter is called The Child of the Train. Better to be moving. That's what train folk say. Better to have rail beneath you, wheels to rock you, a far horizon to reach. On leaving day most of all, better for the wait to be over. And the wait has been so long this time. 10 months of enforced stillness. It is enough to send the calmest of minds mad. Zhang Weiwei, 16 years old, stands at the window in the little vestibule that leads through to the working end of the train. Here, in the carriages closest to the engine, the crew quarters, the garden carriage, the stores, passengers are not allowed. Only the porters and stewards rush by, too busy to pay her any attention. She watches the solid stone buildings of the station recede. High walls enclose the track, and groups of small children dash sure-footed along them, their faces covered by masks that turn them into yellow-horned, bulbous-cheeked monsters, waving and dancing their ritual of parting or warning or glee. On the other side of the walls, along the alleys and avenues, shutters will be slamming closed. Water boiling on stoves will be thrown out as tainted. Couplets will be muttered to ward off bad dreams. The city will be listening, and only when it can no longer hear the sound of the rails and the whistle of the train will it let out its breath and go about its business, content to turn its mind away from the nightmares that lie to the north. She sniffs. How she has missed these acrid smells, the creaking mechanics of her train, the old familiar terror and excitement, the noise, so constant that she ceases to hear it until it is gone. How she has longed these past months for movement, for speed. She has craved it like the red-eyed men in third crave liquor, gasping for the last drops from the jar, maddened to find it empty. But now that they are moving again, the air vibrates with tension. She has heard the whispers among the crew. Too soon. Too soon for the train to ride again. Why not wait for winter and the safer passage through the snow, when the land is drowsy with the cold and danger cannot hide amid the trees? In summer the land is wakeful, hungry. It is too soon to take the risk. Not soon enough for her. But then again, she is too in love with risk, Alexei always says.
Your language is gorgeous. Your sentences, it is lyrical, it is magical, and the entire book reads like that. And I just read it all the way through in one sitting. Thank you for reading.
Oh, thank you.
Just beautiful. And I love hearing it in your voice. I can, now as I think back on it, I will hear it in you reading it. So we are following the train in your debut novel, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. And it's based on a sort of near history fantasy train that is going through the Trans-Siberian Express, traveling from Beijing to Moscow. And I understand this is based on the real life train ride that you took. Can you tell us about that and what inspired the story?
Yeah, when I was 20, I was studying in Beijing for a year. I studied Chinese at university, and we all went to study for a year at a university there. And for some reason that I can't quite now remember, but it's probably something to do with being 20 and feeling like you're invincible and you can do anything. I decided with a couple of friends that we would go home overland all the way back to the UK. And the first part of that journey would be to take the Trans-Siberian Express from Beijing. First we took it to Mongolia, to Ulaanbaatar, and then we stayed in Mongolia for a couple of weeks, and then we took the train from Ulaanbaatar, from Mongolia, all the way to Moscow. And we did it the cheapest possible way, which was to stay on the train the whole time. Back then, it was quite complicated to get visas and tickets and everything. And so we decided we would just buy the really, really basic tickets. We did have a cabin, but we would just stay on this train and take the journey, which lasted we were on the train for 5 nights. And it was one of those journeys that it stays with you. I think when you're traveling in your 20s, it's an impressionable age. The travel you do then is important. But this journey in particular, there was something sort of strange about it. I think there was the 3 of us, foreigners, and almost everybody else on the train was from Mongolia or China, and yeah, we didn't really share a language. In fact, almost everybody was from Mongolia. So we spent a year studying Chinese, and then we were on this train, trying to communicate in a language we didn't speak, but we managed to communicate through shared food, and we played card games, and we were offered many shots of vodka. And I don't like vodka, but drank these shots, and at the time they washed the shots down with milk. I also don't like milk, but drank many a shot of vodka washed down with milk despite this, and through that made friends. And yeah, and we had a strange moment when we crossed the border between Asia and Europe. We'd gone to the dining car to sort of mark this moment, and many of the people from the train, the sort of Mongolian traders, most of them were there already having a huge party. There was music, there was dancing, there was drinking. And so we sort of came back into Europe, you know, in the midst of a party. And yeah, and I think there was sort of something about this whole journey that just it lay dormant for quite a long time. I didn't start the story until a lot later, but I had very happy memories of the journey and of meeting people. And there's something about long train journeys, especially when you're in this enclosed world, and you have to get on with people who you wouldn't normally share anything with. And I think that is a really sort of rich pickings for novelists.
That's incredible. And in the book, you write about the continental crossing. You have the big columns, right, that they go through, and everyone knows it's happening.
Yes, it's much grander in the novel. In the real world, it's a little bit disappointing. There's a sort of a small an obelisk that marks this point. But yes, I imagined that there would actually be markers with the names of the people who gave their lives to build the railway, which in the book is a very dangerous thing because the train is the only way possible across the wastelands. And yes, I imagined all these sort of rituals would have been built up around this idea of the crossing, but that is based on real life to some extent.
Again, another example of near history, right? Or near real life, which I love, which makes this book so approachable. If you're just joining me, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. And today my guest is Sarah Brooks. We're talking about her debut novel, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. Sarah, we were just talking about where you got this idea. We were discussing your incredible travels when you were in your 20s, when you took the real-life Trans-Siberian Express train. I wanted to ask you, are there any other personal connections to this story? Anything that comes out of your own life that you've put into this book?
I mean, it's a lot of it has come from the reading I've done and my experience as well of, and I don't want to sound too boring, but my experience of doing my PhD, which was about classical Chinese ghost stories. So ghost stories from the 17th century that are not sort of scary ghost stories like we might have in Europe or I guess in the US, that are stories that really are about the relationship between the human world, the natural world, and the supernatural world. And I mean, we call them ghost stories, but then maybe it's better to call them an anomaly tales or something like this. They're sort of about strange things, but so often the relationships within them are not necessarily confrontational and scary, but are ways in which the human world encounters the strange, and the ways in which the natural world is incredible and fantastical, sort of strange and understandable at the same time. And I really loved this idea. And I felt that maybe especially, today with our kind of changing relationship with the natural world, with the environment, that this idea of a closer relationship and of not having that same boundary between the human world, the natural world, the supernatural world that maybe we have in literature from Europe or the US. I really loved that. So that kind of came out in the novel as well, certainly in terms of the relationship between Wei Wei, who I read a little bit of a chapter from her point of view, the child of the train, and she meets a stowaway. The stowaway is a Wastelands girl, a Wastelands creature, who Wei Wei has been told that everything in the Wastelands is dangerous. It can kill you. You must stay away. But in her relationship with this girl, with Elena, she starts to question her relationship, I suppose, with the Wastelands. So I think some of that idea came from my reading and my academic research.
Wow. That's amazing. That's a great story. And I think you did paint that very well in the book, where we see the human world and the supernatural world coming together with those two girls. I keep thinking of Elena is a creature. She's not quite a girl because she can move and change and morph. And Wei Wei is a girl and from the human world. But you really see those two coming together very beautifully in that overlap. And that's fascinating. That comes from your own research, from your PhD.
Yeah, it does. There's a brilliant Chinese writer called Pu Songling, who I did my PhD on. He's written a book called, well, it's often translated as Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. And it's a very, this fantastic collection of sort of weird tales that I recommend everybody to read.
It's translated, it's in English. I'm getting a copy. I just wrote it down. It sounds amazing.
It's a translation by John Minford of a selection of the tales that Penguin Books has published. So I highly recommend it.
It sounds really amazing because I also am fascinated by this idea of the supernatural, the natural, and the world changing. This actually leads me directly into my next question for you, which is one really interesting thing that I found when I dug into this book, into you, is that I've seen people talking about The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands, your novel, as many different things. Some people are calling it an allegory, sort of like a 1984. Some people are calling it climate fiction, anti-capitalist, coming of age, right? It's being classified romantasy. Every word is coming out for this book. And I wanted to ask you, how do you want readers to talk about your novel and think about it?
That's such a good question, because I love the way it's been given all these labels, and it's been called steampunk as well. When I wrote it, I just wrote it for myself, really. I think like a lot of first novels, it took a long time to write. It was written over a really long period of time. As I say, the seed of the idea came from this real journey when I was 20, but then the actual story began in a workshop many years later, and then over the years I wrote little bits of it, and it sort of built up and built up. And so as I was writing it, I never really thought, I'm writing a mystery or a straight fantasy or historical fiction. It was just sort of all the things I love just thrown into a story, because I was writing it, as you do whilst you're living your real life and you're working and other things are going on. So I'm happy for it to be crossing genres and for people to see it as different things. I call it historical fantasy, I guess, if I'm introducing it to people simply. But if they would like to think of it as steampunk or anything else, I'm perfectly happy with that.
I couldn't believe people were calling it an anti-capitalist manifesto. I did not see that. You don't think of it as that, an anti-capitalist manifesto?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't see it as an anti-capitalist manifesto. I think the Trans-Siberian company in it is sort of I don't want to say the villain of the piece exactly, but the company is not to be trusted. So I think that's where some of that anti-capitalist idea comes from. Definitely. And again, that's fine, but I didn't want it to be the sort of the core of the story, that it's anti-capitalist or that it's an allegory of anything. I wanted it to be, an adventure story in many ways.
You're listening to Check This Out on New Hampshire Public Radio. I'm your host, Rachel Barenbaum, and my guest today is Sarah Brooks. We're talking about her debut novel, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. And Sarah, it is time to dig into the Wastelands. It is this huge swath of land, a huge piece of the book. Tell us, in your own words, what are the Wastelands? What is that about?
So the Wastelands they're mysterious. They were what was Mongolia and Siberia. And at some point in history, they began to change, and people aren't really sure how or why or exactly when they started, but it seems that they that strange things began to happen little by little, and the sort of strange things were seen in the water, and the crops failed, and the animals started behaving strangely, and the people who lived in these places started moving away. And eventually, over the years, it became so much that these changes were happening so quickly. It's almost as if the land is sort of super fertile, and evolution and change is happening much more quickly than it does in the rest of the world. So in the story, the people at the time built a wall around it, basically. So the Great Wall of China was sort of extended to keep the wastelands in. So it's basically become this swathe of land that is unfriendly to human habitation because of the changes that have happened. And for a long time it was just left, so that this really sort of separated the continents. So all the trade that used to happen, the kind of the Silk routes, the trade between Asia and Europe, really had to stop and find other ways. So in the book, it's had really big effects on the world and on how people live.
So that's the Wastelands. And then the way through the Wastelands, the shortest route through, is with this train that's basically a moving fortress, and it's sealed off. And the people who are lucky enough to be able to afford and to be able to get tickets go through this train. But even being in this sealed off train is super dangerous because the Wastelands creatures are still creeping up around the train. So tell us about that journey and sort of crossing through the Wastelands.
So the train is supposedly a safe way across. So the rail was built, and an armoured train began to move through this strange land. And the armoured train is run by the Trans-Siberian Company, who promised passengers that this is the only safe way across the wastelands. Although they do make passengers sign a waiver before they board, saying that they are, that the company is absolved of any responsibility for the passengers' eventual safe arrival. So that should give a clue, perhaps, to just how safe it is. But they do say that this is the strongest train that has ever been made. It's an armoured train, and it will keep the outside out, and it will keep the passengers safe. But as the book goes on, it becomes clear that is perhaps not necessarily the case.
So we have the Wastelands as a huge swath of the earth, right? A huge mass of land. And of course, the Wastelands in the title of your book is all one word, but also it brings to mind T.S. Eliot's very famous poem about the Wastelands, which is spelled as two different words. So I'm wondering, is there a connection? Is this the same Wastelands? Were you inspired by the poem?
I mean, not really, to be honest. I think the idea of a wasteland, or wasteland, however you want to put it, is such a sort of evocative one, and I think it's been used such a lot, really. And maybe again, people's sort of relationship with their world, and perhaps a world that is unfriendly to them in many ways, and of the kind of ambiguity that we find just with with living in the world. So I think maybe anyone who deals with wastelands or talks about it has that in the back of their heads. And certainly, T.S. Eliot, this casts a very long shadow, but I was very careful to spell my wasteland differently, and to not sort of do anything more than nod towards that.
You very consciously spelled it differently.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I don't know if it was. I was thinking of T.S. Eliot specifically, but I did want it to be all one word. Although in the book, I mean, it's because, as I say, this title, it came a long time ago, and the book developed, and of course, one of the things you maybe think about when you hear the word wasteland is that it is a waste, that there's nothing there. Whereas actually the opposite is true in many ways in this book, that the wastelands, what's strange about them, that there is that there's so much there, that things grow too fast, they evolve too fast, they sort of grow too strangely. And as I was writing, I was thinking, oh, is this word right for it? So I decided to give that to one of the characters in the book. The Wastelands girl, the Wastelands creature, says, why do you call it this? To one of the human characters, and sort of challenges them on this idea of, well, why is it just because it's so different to what you understand as a human or somebody living in the supposedly civilized world? Is this why you call it the Wastelands, even though that word doesn't really make sense. I wanted to shine a light on that ambiguity of the word.
Sticking with this theme just for a minute, I mean, in the poem, and I think in your book also, there are characters who seem to feel a fundamental emptiness. You go on this journey, you dare to take this train because maybe you need something. Maybe you need something you're not even willing to admit. Something is hollow, empty in your life, is what I felt with the characters. Can you talk about that theme a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted all of the characters to have a different relationship with the outside world, so with the Wastelands. There's three point of view characters who are all very different. So Wei Wei, the child of the train, is kind of at home in this landscape. So she feels completely safe on the train. She's an orphan who has been brought up by the crew, basically, and she's always felt that the train will keep her safe. So despite the dangers outside, she knows she's safe on board. But as the book begins, she's 16 and she's starting to question the world around her and what she's been told and what she's seen. So I think she starts off in the beginning of the novel sort of beginning to ask questions about that relationship. The second character, Maria, is a young woman who has come onto the train under an assumed name, looking to find the answers to what happened to her father, who worked on the train and was blamed for something that went terribly wrong on the last journey. And she is very much perhaps in the position of the reader, more in that she everything is new for her, and she knows about the dangers, and she is very, very scared of that world outside. And so her relationship is much more of she's kind of wanting to keep this boundary, this separation. And then the third character, Dr. Henry Gray, is kind of based, I suppose, in some ways on the idea of the kind of the 19th century scientific gentleman who is keen to go and find out and to sort of take everything he can, and whose thirst for knowledge is perhaps, at the expense of other people and places and things. So his relationship with the Wastelands is one of, I suppose it's more of exploitation of how he can take it and use it. And so, yeah, all of these three different characters have a very different relationship with that outside world. And that was something I wanted to do very deliberately.
And they all are missing something. They're on the train because they want something, or they need something, or they're stuck on it because they were born there, right? They have no way off. So that's sort of the unifying theme. And of course, connecting all of them, and one of my favorite themes in your book is the book within a book. So we have Valentin Rostov, who is an author of a series, The Cautious Traveller's Guides. And he has written the only guidebook that's available to travelers here. And it's called The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands, which is the name of your novel. Talk about this book within a book, this very meta traveler's idea here.
Yeah, so I love a book within a book. As soon as I see that, I'm absolutely there. So I really want.
Me too. I love it.
And actually, it was the title came really early on, and I knew I wanted this travel guide, and that the travel guide was going to be important to the book itself. And I love the idea of having such a dangerous landscape, but then a book that is specifically for cautious travellers. So, of course, real cautious travellers would not want to travel in this kind of landscape. But also, another thing that I really love is that those 19th century travel guides, which were, I don't know how it was in the US, but certainly in the UK and in Europe, there were lots of these great guides that were really all about how to travel abroad without losing all of the luxuries and safety and nice British food that you could get at home. So they were all sort of advising Victorian travellers where to go to see the best art, the most beautiful churches, to stay in the best hotels which had the softest beds, or go to the restaurants which didn't have this strange foreign food, but where you could have something sensible and British. And I think these travel guides are just brilliant. And so I wanted something a bit like that. But I imagined, well, what would happen if the writer of one of those kinds of guides, which was all about how to be safe and, hygienic, and to minimize risk or discomfort in any possible way. What would happen if he did travel to somewhere that was so dangerous that it actually affected his mind almost, and what would happen then? So that was the sort of the core of the story. So his cautious travelers guides, I imagine he wrote them about Paris and Rome and all these other places, but then when it came to the Wastelands, it really changed the way that he traveled after that.
How did you research and learn about Victorian travel guides?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know. Being very geeky, I think is the answer to that. And working at a university where there's wonderful opportunities to research basically anything you like.
But did you happen upon them, or did you go out looking for them?
Oh, I just knew about them. I think there's is it in famous E.M. Forster book where they're in Italy, A Room with a View. They talk about their Baedeker a lot, and I remember reading that book and they, what is this Baedeker? And the Baedeker's guides were these kind of 19th century guides, so I knew about that. And there's also the Bradshaw's guides that are quite famous in this country. So yeah, I was already quite familiar with them, and then just enjoyed being able to read them and see what they advise the cautious Victorian traveller to do.
So you went to the library and you read them.
Yeah, I read. I mean, they're easy to find still. So it's very. I did so much research for this book that did not most of which did not go into the actual novel, but I had a wonderful time doing the research. Although I should definitely not. I feel a bit guilty because I think my colleagues at the university probably saw me and thought I was being very studious and working hard on my own research, whereas actually I was working on my novel. So don't tell them.
I don't think most people know that there is a huge amount of research behind historical fantasy. Most people think, oh, she just made it up. Tell us, what other research did you do?
This is the funny thing, I suppose, because I did all the research and then I ignored quite a lot of it and made it up. But because I think it's great to have that research so that it's in your head. So I read a lot about the beginnings of the Trans-Siberian Express, which is worth a novel in itself. I mean, it's an incredible story how this railway was actually built. It's a very unlikely story in many ways. And the actual train in real life started a little bit later than mine did. But yeah, I read about the history of the train, and then there's a lovely book that collects together early sort of travellers' stories about going on the Trans-Siberian Express, and many of which are, they're complaining about the food and the discomfort, and it's very entertaining to read, and so that was the kind of research that I did just to get that colour and that atmosphere. So I felt that I could imagine what it would have been like to travel on that earlier train. But then, as I say, I kind of ignored a lot of it and didn't use the specifics. All the stuff that I knew, and that I've got all these great facts, I must get them into the book. And then of course they either wouldn't fit in, or my editor kind of got rid of there's way too much detail. It added to that colour.
It really did. So then I'm dying to ask you, one of the big problems that the train has in traveling is it runs out of water. It doesn't have enough water. The Wastelands need water, the people on the train need water, and they just have to make it to the next well. Is that also a real life problem on these trains?
Well, yes. Oh, I did so much research about this specifically, and it's amazing. These trains, they did have water scoops. And so the wells that are in the book, they're not completely made up at all. That steam trains did have water stops along the way, kind of under the tracks, and the trains would have a scoop on their underside, and that as they travelled across, they would be able to scoop up the water and then carry on, which I thought was brilliant. Yeah, and so I had lots of detail about this, almost all of which did not go in the book, sadly. Well, probably all the better for the readers, but I was a bit sad. But yeah, it was a big thing. I mean, I should say, though, going back to your point about historical fantasy and you can make things up, is that if you are looking to see if this train would actually work, It would not. The train in my book is definitely a fantastical train. And so despite having done this research, I did get to the point where I thought, I'm just not sure if, physically or mechanically this is going to work. And then I thought, it's fine, I'm writing fantasy. So please just take all the sort of the engineering, the hand waving in the book with a pinch of salt.
But an incredibly impressive amount of research went in to make it so readable and so believable and magical at the same time. If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from NHPR. My guest today is Sarah Brooks, and we are talking about her new novel, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. Sarah, you have done a super impressive amount of research. You had to keep track of a lot of things. And you also introduce us to basically an ensemble cast of characters. There are a lot of them. So how did you keep track of these characters, and how did you decide which ones you wanted to focus on, give us their perspective, their point of view in the novel?
Yeah, I think from the very early on, I had my three main characters. So I loved the idea of having a girl who was born on the train. I think I spent, I read a lot of books as a child about plucky orphans. And so I wanted my own plucky orphan in my book. So right from the beginning, she was very, very important. And then in terms of the story, there is a mystery in the book. So one of the characters, Maria, is on the train in order to solve this mystery, to find out what happened to her father. And so she was a kind of a little bit of a stand-in for the reader, I suppose, as well. And then Henry Gray, who is the scientist character, in the early drafts, he was much more villainous than he ended up being. So I think he's still an antagonist in many ways. He's this sort of 19th century scientist who is willing to stop at nothing really to use the wastelands for his own ends. But as it went along, I kind of found him quite interesting. So I think maybe changed my attitude towards him a little bit. So he's still a very flawed character. Yeah, I think he's not necessarily a straightforward villain. So I had my three main characters, and then I think with any novel set on a train, you have to have quite a large cast in many ways, and I certainly love the classic tales of trains like Murder on the Orient Express. One of the difficult things about writing a novel was trying to give the feeling of a train that is full of people without having to spend too much time telling all of these stories. So that was quite difficult, balancing that and then just taking a few key characters you might expect to find in First Class, for example. So there's a countess who is very sure of herself and complains about the sort of lack of hot water, or she's a bit dubious about the food. There's a priest who is very worried about the fact that the wastelands is this ungodly place. And then in Third Class as well, there are sort of characters who come in and out a little bit, but who we don't spend too much time with, but who are very important to give this feeling that there is the train full of people whose lives are at stake.
So did you write several drafts of each character's story and then just cut until you got down to your three?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I wrote so many drafts of this novel, so many. I think the early drafts were much longer. There was definitely more on each character. So I had to be really brutal in order to cut down, and my editors had to be brutal as well, much to my horror.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from NHPR. My guest today is Sarah Brooks, and we are talking about her new novel, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. Sarah, I want to dig more into the writing process here. You had said that you wrote many, many drafts. This show, Check This Out, is devoted to emerging and diverse authors. So I have a lot of new authors on here, and I will tell you, so many of them have been working on their books for 10 years or more. It is very normal process to spend this long on a book.
Yes, it's always reassuring to hear from other writers.
Yes. And I understand this actually started as a short story. So when did you write the short story, and how long has this journey been for you?
Okay, don't judge me on how long this has taken. The short story was written in 2012 in a workshop actually in America. So in Seattle, I went to the Clarion West Writers Workshop, which was it was a life-changing experience actually. It's a 6-week workshop for science fiction and fantasy writers. They get amazing writers every year to come and tutor it. And each week you have to write a full short story, which will then get critiqued by your classmates, so by your 18 classmates, and by the tutor. So the week that I wrote this story, I don't know, I had a bit of a mind blank because the tutor was George R. R. Martin for this week. So of course we were reading Game of Thrones, and it just started to come out on TV. And yeah, I think we're like, oh my God, we have to write something really good. And so I just sort of thought, I have no ideas in my head until this idea just kind of popped up, almost fully formed, in terms of the title and the idea that it was going to be a travel guide, and that we would see little snippets of the travel guide and then follow the characters on the train.
Yes, wow.
Critiqued by George R. R. Martin.
That is not something you hear every day. I started this book with George R. R. Martin. Wow. And you also have a day job. You're an academic, so tell us about that and what you do.
Yeah, so I work at the University of Leeds in East Asian Studies. I teach mostly Chinese literature and film, and also comparative literature or world literature. And I help run the Leeds Centre for New Chinese Writing, which is a centre focused on Chinese literature in translation. So we have lots of authors and translators coming to Leeds for events, and we have a book club and translation competition. I'm very lucky, I think, to have the sort of two sides of my work. So I have my academic work, which I really love, but then also to have the creative side as well.
So are you also a translator?
I don't know. I don't translate professionally. I mean, I have translated. So during my PhD, I translated some of the ghost stories that I talked about, the ones that hadn't been translated into English. And I teach some translation. I would love to do more literary translation, but I think it's such an incredible skill that I'm definitely not qualified to be able to do that. And I'm very grateful for all the people who are qualified and who bring incredible literature into English.
I love that you actually started writing this in 2012. So you've been working in academia, but also wanting to write fiction for all these years too.
For quite a long time, it was just a nice way of turning my brain off work, writing really for fun.
So your book is very magical, and also it contains clear descriptions of the landscape and everything that we see in the Wastelands and in the train. Are you an artist, or do you have pictures of this around your office, or is it just all in your head?
Oh, I am not an artist. I am the farthest away from an artist that anybody could possibly be. It is in my head. As well, from the real journey, even though it was a long time ago now, I remember really clearly standing at the train window and watching the landscape outside, hours and hours and hours of trees and woods, but sort of looking at it, and the more you look at landscape like that, the more it starts becoming strange, and you think, oh, can I see a face in that tree? So that kind of landscape is really lodged very firmly in my head. And I've traveled a lot as well, and read a lot of fantasy, so I think I have a vivid imagination and no artistic talent, so it has to come out in words.
So Sarah, you've finished, or you feel like you've gotten to a point where you're ready to start looking for an agent or put this book out into the world, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. And most people would query for an agent, meaning they would send off emails asking agents to reply and, ask to read the whole manuscript so that they could then offer representation or not. But I understand that you actually you were super lucky, you bypassed that whole process and found another way to your agent. Can you tell us about that process?
Yeah, well, I should say my experience is a little bit different actually in terms of querying and finding an agent, in that I found my agent through a competition. So there's a competition in the UK called the Lucy Cavendish Writing Prize for women writers. And as part of that, on the judging panel every year, there's an agent. And for the competition, you only have to send in the first few chapters, or the first 50 pages maybe. And so I'd been working on this novel for so long, I thought, oh, a competition is a really great way of actually just giving myself a deadline and forcing myself to at least polish up these first chapters and to write a synopsis and to really let myself take this seriously. So sent it off right at the deadline. I think I had minutes to spare, because I got to that point of thinking, oh, actually, this is terrible. I'm not going to send this. It's not going to get anywhere. And then thought, oh, fine, I'll do it. And yeah, and then got shortlisted and finally won the prize. And as part of the prize, everybody on the shortlist gets to have a sort of consultation with the agent. And it was at that point that she offered representation, despite the fact that at that point I had nowhere near a full polished draft at all. So yeah, so it was a slightly unusual way of doing it, maybe, in that I then worked with her for quite a long time, and she's a very editorial agent. She was happy to take it on despite the chaos of the draft. Yeah, and then so I went through actually at least a couple more full drafts with her, more than that actually, before it was ready to then send out to publishers.
Sarah, that is an amazing story, and it really speaks to how good this book is, The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands. So not only did you have an unusual process for finding your agent, also for the book sale itself, you have an incredible story. So tell us that one.
Yeah, so it was really exciting and funny because I had spent, as I said, a long time writing the book and then a long time working with my very patient agent, going through several drafts. And she does not mince her words, so I knew that she would not send it out until she was absolutely ready. But then, yeah, when she was ready, really quickly we started getting interest from editors,
like same day, right?
And yeah, so it was this incredible week of she was calling me up or she was emailing me and saying this person's interested, and got a preempt that she then said, oh, I think I think we shouldn't go for it, we'll keep going. And we eventually went to auction, which was really incredible. So I got to meet different publishers who all had, different ideas for the book, and they were all really passionate about it. And then found my publisher, my UK publisher, Weidenfeld and Nicholson, I just really, really clicked with. So that was how it worked in the UK.
And then Flatiron picked up the book. They also bought it. What I love about this story is you're really telling us about how many people helped you put this book together, right? You had this beautiful idea, but then you had an agent that you had to work with, and you had a team of editors that you worked with, not just, you in a room pouring out these ideas. That books take so much work and effort from an entire team to come together.
Oh my goodness, yeah, it's so true. And it's interesting, I find that friends and family who aren't writers will sometimes say, oh, are you not annoyed when people are trying to edit your work and they want to change it? And I say, no, I'm delighted when someone wants to help me. And having all these amazing people being involved with their ideas and their thoughts and their questions, I think has absolutely made it stronger. So it's completely vital for any writer.
So what advice do you have for new writers?
I would say read, this is the obvious advice is read everything, but I think read outside your genre as well. I write historical fantasy, but I kind of feel I read everything. And I would also say do look for opportunities, competitions, publications, organizations who might help you, and don't self-reject. As I said, I almost didn't apply, didn't submit to this competition, but then it ended up that competition was really, it changed my whole writing career. So I think my biggest piece of advice would be to just not listen to that little voice in your head that is telling you, oh, you're not that good, actually, this is rubbish, what are you doing? And just push it away and think if you love this story, it's worth going on with, and you'll find other people who love it as well. And it's a long process, and don't feel you need to rush it.
Sarah Brooks, I've loved talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to Check This Out, a literary series which is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire. We dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. Next week, join me for Elizabeth Gonzalez James and her new novel, The Bullet Swallower. Our producer today is Jessica Hunt. The Howe Library Director is Ruby Simon. NHPR's Program Director is Emily Quirk. The show is sponsored by the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation and the Howe Library Corporation. Remember to go to your local library and check out all of the books that you hear about here and love, or go to your local bookstore and buy a copy. See you next week.